Okay, um, so I'm Kelly Shorlin. I am actually in this picture. Let me see if I can get the laser pointer up. That's me. I'm right down here at the front of the room. I did a bachelor's and a master's here at MUN, and then I went to Ontario and did a PhD. I moved here in 2004, where I started working in the labs in the physics department. I did some sessional instruction, and then now since 2017, I've been a full-time visiting professor, so I am teaching full-time now. A typical year for me, I teach two classes a semester. One is a small class that's got like 25 to maybe 80 students, and one is a big class between about 175 and 300. I typically teach first year physics, and first year physics is kind of special. I really love it. I love teaching first year, even in these great big classes. They're their own special beast, but it's still fantastic. I picked this picture to put on the intro slide on purpose. It was taken from the point of view of a student. It popped up on Spotted at MUN a few years back. And what I really like about it is it gives us a sense of what these big classes are like for a student. So this student was up in the back of the room. It was hard to see me. It's probably hard to see what I'm doing at the front. Your gaze is no doubt drawn towards the screen versus the people. Um, there's not much pressure to pay attention. You know, if the student sitting in that seat fell asleep, chances are I wouldn't even see them. So I think if you want students to be engaged, you have to work really hard at being engaging. You have to give them something worth listening to. So that's kind of my goal when I'm teaching. The first thing I'll get out of the way is I'm going to say that the COVID years, and I don't know if this is true for you or not, but the COVID years were really rough for me. I was lonely, I was scared, I was unmotivated, I wasn't confident with what I was doing. And don't get me wrong, I did my very best. I tried really hard and I worked really hard, but you just kind of never knew. It's almost like you're talking to a vacuum. There's none of that instant feedback of do people understand? Are they interested? What are you doing? So I found that really, really rough, all those COVID remote classes. And my remote teaching went on a little longer than some people because last year, when smaller classes were back, my big classes were still remote. So last semester, fall 2022, was my first time back in person with my big classes. It was my biggest class ever. I had 300 students registered, so it was an enormous class. And to be honest, I don't know that that was lots better for me than the COVID years. It was still kind of rough. And I think maybe a lot of the roughness came from the expectation on my end. The students were not where they were pre-COVID. And when I say that out loud, I know how ridiculous that sounds. They didn't have the academic skills, they didn't have the social skills that they had before COVID, and it totally makes sense now. Um, but I will say that I still totally noticed that my students were really invested. They wanted to do well and they wanted to succeed. And a key difference I think I was seeing was that they didn't really know how to make that happen. They didn't totally know how to make a goal, how to set a goal. They didn't know the steps to get to that goal. And they didn't have the tools, like knowing how to take notes in a class, knowing what kinds of questions would help them. So there was a lot of stuff there that was kind of getting in their way. I had a rough term and I know they did too. So we've got that established. For me, anyway, everybody has different experience, I'm sure. So the next thing I'll say is that I think engagement, even in large classes, maybe especially in large classes, is super important. Like learning is a whole discovery process. And the more invested a student is, I think the better they're going to do. If they're feeling a little more connected and a little more interested, then I think they're going to succeed more. And they're probably going to enjoy their time here a little better as well. I would say that for me, the first thing I think about when engaging students is that they have to have a safe pace, a safe place to be engaged. Um, they need to know that it's okay when they're in my classroom that they can think and they can contribute and that they can be heard, that every single person matters, everybody has a voice, that I welcome all of the contributions and the different approaches and ideas towards studying physics. Um, and that might sound a little bit off base when we talk about physics. Often we think about it's really rigorous. You have this set of equations and there's one way, my way or the highway. I don't really see it that way. I kind of think people have been studying physics as long as we've had people, and everybody's got something to share about learning physics and stuff. So, how I try and set the stage for a safe and inclusive learning environment so that students are okay to be engaged. First thing I do is I just straight up tell them that they matter to me. On the first day of class, when I'm going through the syllabus, I come out from behind the desk. I put my pen down, I try and make eye contact with as many as I can, and I tell them that their high school teachers told them that when they came to MUN, they would just be a number and nobody was going to care about them at all. And I tell them that that's not true. I tell them that MUN, as an institution, cares about their success. And I personally, me, Kelly, I care about their success. So I let them know that, I'm in their corner. I care that they're going to do well. When I teach, I try very hard to be inclusive. In physics, it's mostly the old European white guys who wrote the papers and the history books. So those are most of the physics that make it into the textbooks. But I try really hard to incorporate all the learning that we've got from other culture and other people. I like to think that that makes that a good place for people who are from other cultures, and that what their contributions are also matter. When I teach remotely, and I did that a fair bit, I tried really hard to start off on a welcomingly relaxed tone. So I thought maybe we would do that here. First of all, I like to start with some icebreaker questions. So if you wish, if you feel comfortable, I would maybe ask people to put up their answers in the chat window. And I do this with my students. I might have 200 of them logged in online in a session, and I ask them these questions and they roll up in the chat window. I think it's fabulous. So I will ask all of you, how long have you been at MUN? I personally have been working here since 2004, and I was a student before, so I'm going on 30 years at the university. Okay, I don't see anything coming up in the chat window. That's okay. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Oh, student and faculty, I like that, not just me. Yeah, okay. So we all have different histories, and I like for my students to see this as well. Of course, in my classes, it's a lot of brand new students, but we get some who've been around for a while longer too. Yeah, another student, that's great. 3 months, okay, somebody new. I'm on for 5 years. So we got lots of range here, even in this small session. On a scale of 1 to 5, how was last term? And I asked this of my students as well. I asked them things about remote. For me, I think I'm a 2. I won't say I was down as far as 1, but I definitely was not higher as a 2 for last term. 3. This one might be a little bit more vulnerable to share. Not everybody likes to answer if they're having a rough time. Totally legitimate. Yeah, and some people have a great time. I had some students who really thrived in that remote learning environment. They thought it was the best. Okay, so we've got a range here again, from not so great to super. Next question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how engaging are you as a teacher? Certainly this is not something I asked my students, but I thought it might be appropriate here. Um, this one is a hard one for me to answer for myself. Maybe I'll put myself as a 4. I think I could do better, but I do try really hard. Okay, I'm with a lot of like minds there. Yeah, other 4s popping up. It's great. Yeah, hard to judge, isn't it? Hard to tell for sure. And I definitely like to ask students this one. What's your biggest challenge right now? Because we all have our challenges. I will share that my biggest challenge right now is probably looking after myself. I hit a complete burnout at the end of last semester. 300 students is just a lot. And I'm still trying to get my balance back, how to figure that out, balance teaching and home and relaxing and just being a regular human being. So yeah, I definitely like to throw that out there for my students and ask them what their challenges are. Okay, this one. Okay, this is not so hot for this meeting. Hard to balance. Yep, balance. That's a doozy, isn't it? Because there's so much you have to do. Being connected, I agree 100%. It is so hard to stay in touch. Oh yeah, you've got your hands full, don't you? Young kids and balanced teaching. Your mind is probably going a bunch of different ways at the one time. Yeah, I hear you. I don't have young children, but my big children still pull my mind in different directions too. Um, This slide here, this works fantastic when we're in the remote and the students are at home. Boy, do they ever light up when you ask them to get their pets and put them on camera. So here's mine. My dog is Pippin and my cat is Pinto. He is on the table. He's not supposed to be, but he's kind of old. Yes, they look very similar. One cat. Yeah, people just love their pets, right? People can be a little bit crazy about them, which is great, right? But yeah, they really like to share those. Okay, so that's kind of my icebreaker questions. Those really help us warm up, puts people at a comfort level. You get to see your fellow classmates as human beings with kind of some same ideas, some different ideas. The next thing, I really enjoy this. This has gone over really well, is a round of trivia. I've had different kinds of trivia in the past. This is the one I've settled on as my favorite because I like for it to be nominally about physics, but really more about people. So my trivia contest questions, my trivia round, I do a much longer one in class. I thought I would do a half a dozen here for us, is to ask students if they can identify the language. What I've especially found good about this, and if you can recognize the language, please do, or if you have a guess, put it up in the chat window. What I like about this is it's a welcome to students whose home language is different from English, if they're different from different cultures. I've seen them get real excited about seeing their language. So this is a brief history of time. I'll give a hint now. I've ordered them in how popularly spoken the language is in the world. So one guess came up Mandarin. It is Chinese, but I don't know if it's Mandarin or Cantonese. So Chinese is definitely it. Okay, let's do the next one. This is language number 2. Espanol, absolutely correct. This is a Spanish one. I find with the students, you get a few competitive ones who want to get it in first before everybody else. So that's kind of fun too. You get to learn a little bit about their natures while they're doing this. Okay, here's my next one. This was the most excited I've ever seen a student get in the chat window because this was his home language. So this one is the 5th most spoken. This one is Hindi. Yep. Okay, what's my next one? Okay, this one is a little bit blurry. Hopefully you can see it well enough to make a guess. For me, the shape of the letters kind of gives it away a bit. Shape of the character. Sorry, I shouldn't have said letters. This one's Korean. Yep. Okay, I think I have 2 more to go. Okay, how about this one? Anybody recognize? I would love to learn how to write this language and speak. Yep, Arabic. This one's pretty easy to see. Oh, 2 more. Yeah, it looks Russian. This one's actually Ukrainian. In the OG version, I did do Russian as well. Okay, and here's the last one. I totally cheated on this one. Yeah, hard to tell, right? This language is actually Hausa. It's the most commonly spoken language in Nigeria. I could not find a book cover in the Hausa language, and then a Google search, as much as I was willing to look around, kind of led me to believe the book was actually banned in Africa. So I'm not really sure what's up with that, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, there's all of our icebreakers done. And absolutely, when I'm meeting with my class for the first time remotely, I take up most of my first class to do this. It just gets us all relaxed and gets us all working together. But now to kind of get into the topics of some things that I will actually do in class. Some of them will apply more to physics, some of them could go to every discipline. So the first thing I like to do is I'm kind of old school and I want the students to write notes. So I want them to write along with me. Before class, I do a set of template slides and I'll put in a picture, I'll put in a question, maybe I'll put in some definitions, maybe I'll put in a picture, but I'll start with this and I encourage the students either to print them off and bring them to class with a pen to take notes or to download them to a PDF viewer. Then during class, I make notes. So I'll write some things out like this. Here's an example example that I did in class. This too bright sticky note was the answer to the homework questions. And I really encourage the students to write along with me. I definitely encourage them to use an actual pen and paper. Apparently, there's some research that shows the scratchiness of the pen actually helps learn the material better than writing on an iPad or a laptop. I do, of course, allow the iPads and laptops. There's no way you can really say no to that at this point. Too many students just use it. One other thing I do about the iPads and the laptops is I ask that nobody in the first few rows use one of those. So if you want an iPad or a laptop, I ask them to please not sit in the first 3 or 4 rows so that I get a screen-free zone. I've heard from some of my students who have attention difficulties that they really appreciate that there's no screen next to them when they're trying to pay attention. I learned that from Jason Geary, who used to work over here. I thought that was a great tip. I've done it ever since. Okay, next, in class, I ask lots and lots of questions, and I try and get them to answer. Um, and it can be hard to get them to answer, and that's why you need the safe space. So I did this specific one in my class on Tuesday. And that class on Tuesday, it was, yeah, I know the screens are the worst, right? So in that class on Tuesday, it was only my second class in person because I'd been out more than a week sick. So we were still new to the class, but I still did this and I still got good response. So we were talking about waves in a physics sense. And to think about what a wave is, I'm not going to assume anybody's done physics before. Imagine you throw a rock in the water and you get these set of ripples coming out. So the ripples are the wave. I had explained to my students that what's important is that you need something to start the wave, like the rock, and you need ways for the water or the medium to interact. So the water molecules have to push on each other. That's how the waves spread out. So then the question I asked my class is the wave that we do at a sports arena, is that really honestly and truly a wave? So that was the question I asked. Then I played this video for them. Sorry, I didn't recognize it to be so loud. And this is the wave going around the sky dome. Once the video finished, I said, now take a minute and think. I encourage them to talk to their neighbors. I don't force them to talk because a lot of times people are just uncomfortable, but I encourage them to talk to their neighbors. And I ask them to really think about, is this wave done in the stadium? Is it really and truly a wave in the way that we talked about a wave? I gave them some time to think and some time to talk. And then the next part, and I think this is really key, I asked them to commit to an answer. So if they were writing notes, I asked them to write down on their sheet of paper, either yes or no, it was a wave or it wasn't a wave. If they weren't taking notes, I asked them to make that statement in their mind so that they really committed, because you got to commit. You can't have one foot in both answers. Then you'll convince yourself you were always right. So you got to commit to an answer. There's a lot to be learned from being wrong once in a while. And then I asked them if anybody, first I polled them for their answer. So I asked who thinks it is a wave. I asked for a show of hands, and who thinks it's not. I asked for a show of hands. I was really pleased with the turnout. Almost everybody in class did vote. Not everybody, because not everybody wants to put themselves out there, and that's fine. If you're not comfortable, you're not comfortable. But almost everybody voting encourages the other people to also vote. Then after they voted, I asked if anybody wanted to share why they said what they said. And then people did start to speak up. So the yeses started first and they gave their answer. One student gave an answer. It wasn't totally correct, and that was fine. I told her I understood why she said what she said and how it was, that was a little bit misunderstood, and here's how it actually works. It was all fine. She didn't look embarrassed. And then I asked the noes if they wanted to give their answer. If anybody would like to put in what they think in the chat window, that's absolutely fine. And then I gave the kind of established answer, which is that there is no established answer. Physicists actually disagree on this point. I think it's not a wave because the people don't physically pull on each other. Some people say it is a wave, but it was a really great class discussion. Everybody started thinking about, what moves, how does it move, why does it move, what started it moving, and the class really worked together, even though we were only a couple of lectures in. So I like to do those kind of almost every class, ask them a question, ask them to think about and commit commit to their answer and give them a chance to give a reason for their answer. Um, with a big class, maybe it's easier. Like there's often people willing to speak up, or I find there's always somebody willing. Yeah, absolutely. I love questions that don't have an answer, right? I think they're really good. Then both students get to say, hey, it was okay. The things I were thinking was fine. I think that's really good. So I do these all the time, pretty much every class. It can take a lot of time, but I think it's really worth it. I think there's a lot of learning that comes out of those things. Okay, let's skip that question. Another thing I like to do when I start a topic is I like to figure out, approach from, something like that, where the students right are at the moment. So I've been talking to a colleague about an idea called folk physics. I think that's intriguing and I'm going to learn more about it. But it's basically, what do everyday people, people who haven't studied physics for a million years like me, kind of how do they think about physics? How do they approach it? And what does it mean to them? How would they explain how things work? So when I start my class on forces, I don't start by defining forces or putting in symbols and units and equations. I start by asking, what are the forces on this sled? So the sled is nominally being pulled by a couple of dogs. And I just asked the students, would they like to tell me what these forces are? And I would say every single time I do this, the students always get the right answer because they kind of know this stuff in their bones, right? They can look, they can see the string, and they know the dogs pull on the string, and that's what pulls the sled. So everybody gets that pulling one. They know that it has weight because everything has weight, so they can talk about the weight. They know that when we're in this deep snow, the snow slows it down. They might not always have the words, but they can certainly say that the snow will slow it down, so I can tell them about friction. And then some students get, some don't get the fact that the ground itself holds it up. It's obvious when you say it, but it might not be obvious to think about it. So I open up with that discussion and students contribute all those ideas, and then I can take it from there. I can start putting the physics terminology in, I can put the symbols in, and I can talk about how we use the equations to analyze all the different motion. So I really love beginning from a place where they already know something because it gives them the confidence to say, oh yeah, I do know this, but now I'm going to talk about it in a new way. So I find that helps a lot, and I do that as often as I can with my different topics. Okay, next, as often as possible, I like doing demonstrations in class. Sometimes it's just me up at the front with kind of one big thing that I can show them. More often, and as often as I can, I like to get students to do it themselves. So one class that I do has to do with their cell phones, which they kind of like anyway. Makes me cool, I think, that I let them take a phone out in class. And I pass out sheets of tin foil for the entire class. So I buy a couple of rolls of aluminum foil, and every student comes in and gets a sheet of foil. So this is sort of talking about how electric signals work. So when I was teaching, okay, thanks for being here, Jonathan. Um, when I was teaching remotely, of course, I couldn't pass out foil wrap to everybody in my class. I did encourage them to do this at home, but I did the experiment on a video with a friend. So I'm going to play that video here now. Or maybe I'll turn the volume down first, just so we can see how it works. And hopefully you can imagine a room full of, a few hundred students doing this live.
Okay, to talk about electric shielding, I have a volunteer. Hello. And a cat close by. So this is a try this at home physics. What you need is a cell phone and a friend. Also tin foil, but we won't get to the aluminum foil just yet. So to begin our demo, Mary Honey, will you please call my phone? Can do.
My friend, of course, was my daughter.
Takes a moment to get through. So you can see my daughter is calling me. Hopefully you can hear it. Can probably see the edge of the cat crawling on my desk. Okay, now the next thing you do after you try it is, I'm sorry, working from home is such a disaster. It's no less true for you than it is for me. So grab your aluminum foil, tear off a fairly large sheet, and wrap up your phone in the foil. So I've got my phone and I'm wrapping it up. Okay, now ask your friend to call you again. So what happens is that the signal can't get through the tinfoil. The tinfoil makes what's called a Faraday cage. We can't get any net electric field inside. So the electric field inside a conductor is zero. Your cell phone operation depends on electric fields. No field, no function.
So that's a really fun demo that we do in class. Students are a little bit baffled by it, like they're so surprised when it works that a piece of foil can actually block the electric signal. So I really like this sort of thing where they can do it themselves and they can see that it works. You know, they tell me that once in a while they do it at home to show other people, so that kind of goes with them. Let's see. This one, oh, I took out my thing. So this is another one I love to do in class. This one also goes with electricity. And what it is, I can't do a demo here. If you crunch a Lifesavers, it actually makes a little spark. So what I do in class is I bring in a Lifesavers, and it has to be the wintergreen. I pass one out for every student. Um, and I turn off all the lights. That's kind of mind blowing when you're in the Inco Center and you turn all the lights out. It gets really dark in there. And then I have them chomp the Lifesavers with their mouth open while their friend watches, and you can see the spark. They find that so fun. And then we kind of go on to talk about that sort of thing. Here's another one I do. So when I do a class on forces and elastic force, I bring in, I call it a demo. It's not much of a demo. I bring in 2 elastic bands for everybody, and I ask them to bring their water bottle. And then what I do is I just have them put the water bottle on the elastic band like this, and then I get them to do things like pull the water bottle down, see that it bounces back and forth, and ask them to time how long does it take to bounce back and forth. And then I get to investigate a little bit more. Instead of 1 rubber band, use 2. How long does that take? And then instead of your water bottle being mostly full, drink half the water and see what happens then. So I get them doing these experiments in class, and then we talk about the results, and then we move on to kind of the physics theory and the physics equations. I think those busy hands really help engage the mind, and then they can do it. They can kind of really absorb it a little better, and they kind of understand how it all works, and they see it happening. So those sorts of experiments, I find they go over really well in class. I have a couple of more, but they're kind of physics specific, so maybe I'll just move on to another idea. I don't want to keep people here forever. The next thing is I love a good YouTube video. If you can think about it, there's a YouTube video for it, I'm sure. I've found so many. So in one of my classes, we talk about collisions and momentum. So what's interesting is kind of what happens before, what happens while 2 things are crushing into each other, and what happens afterwards. These are things we talk about. So I found a video from the slow-mo guys, and these are the absolute best for physics. I'm going to play it for you because I think it's really kind of fun, and I hope you're going to like it too. So let me just turn the volume down first, and then I'll hit play.
Alright, well this is my favourite part of the challenge. I don't know about yours. This is a football, or a soccer ball, depending on where you're watching this, filled kind of all the way up with water, so it's got a bit more weight to it. And I'm going to throw it really hard at the side of your head.
Thanks, yeah, brilliant.
I reckon expose the teeth, and I want to see eyes wide open, just so you can get the full extent of skull movement. Ready?
Oh, Is that any good or not? Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's like one of those Newton's cradle things. The ball just stops dead and then your head carries on at the same speed.
That's ridiculous.
Look at this. I reckon this should be your Facebook profile. That'd be wicked.
So that video doesn't do any of the teaching about collisions, but I do actually find that when you play a YouTube video, it just kind of breaks the class a little bit, because I stand and I talk and I write notes and they're doing that with me. But it's hard to do that for 50 minutes straight. So if I can introduce a topic and play this 1 or 2 minute video, then it's like we get a reset. They're kind of sitting up, they're re-engaged, they're thinking again. So then we can move on for the next little while. So I love kind of a YouTube video whenever possible, just to do a little bit of the work and just to break things up a bit. I try for these pretty often as well. What else? So first year physics, maybe physics in general, a lot of times students wonder, is it real? Is it important? Does anybody care? And as a physicist, I say, of course, oh my goodness. But as a first year student, they don't have that same point of view that I do. So whenever I can, I like to make it real. I like to talk about why it's important. So one of the first things we do in my introductory physics class is we talk about unit conversions, and that's something like going from kilograms to pounds. So we do it, and it's a little dull and it's a little dry, and I know the students don't enjoy it. But then I ask them, do you actually think it's important? Could it ever matter? And then I tell this story about the Gimli glider. So this is really interesting. I think it's fascinating. So what happened with the Gimli glider, and this was like 1983, a flight going from Edmonton to Montreal. Oh, sorry, I got that backwards. Montreal to Edmonton. So it took off from Montreal, was flying towards Edmonton. Before the flight took off, the ground crew had to fuel up the plane. And they did fuel it up, but they made a mistake when they did their conversions between kilograms and pounds, and the plane ended up with half the fuel. So the plane took off and it didn't have enough fuel to make it the whole way. So as the plane was on its way, at one point during the flight, the fuel alarm went off. So I guess it was a red light and a beep, beep, beep or whatever. And now here's the compounding factor. The fuel gauge in the plane was broken. So the pilots who were flying, they said, no, there's plenty of fuel. We oversaw the ground crew, the flight crew filling it up. I know there's enough fuel, even though the gauge is broken, and they turned off the alarm. Turns out it was not a false alarm because of the faulty conversion, and the plane ran out of fuel and the engine stopped. Now, this is not a bad news story because the pilot was actually an experienced glider pilot. He was able to just glide that right down without the help of the engines onto a Air Force base, like on a track on an Air Force base. So that's so amazing that they were safe. But I like to show the students that, yeah, it really honestly and truly matters how you convert units, and it's a big deal if you get it wrong. Also with the units, I talk a lot about medicine. When doctors and nurses are giving medicine, it has to be in the right amounts, so they can't go from grams to kilograms wrong, or somebody could end up very ill. So I definitely like to set the context, and I hope that makes them feel more engaged to what we're doing when they see the real life, impact of these things. My other favorite example, as we go on in Physics 1020, we start to talk about conservation of energy. And it's not a real complicated thing. It's like if we have a hill on the top of a car and it starts to roll down the hill, eventually it'll go faster and faster. So we say it goes from having all potential energy at the top, that's stored energy, to all kinetic energy at the bottom, that's when things are moving. And we say that those are conserved, and we treat it in a straightforward way, so we know that the total amount has to be the same. So that's what we talk about it, and we neglect all sorts of things like friction and air resistance. So we do a simplified version for sure, but we do talk about it. So I get to asking my students, do you think this matters to anybody, right? Does our simple first year approach, does it have an impact? And then I like to tell them about the Apollo 13 story, which actually not all of them know. Apollo 13 was a big movie when I was kind of a young adult or a teenager, but it's not so popular anymore. It was on Netflix for a while and it's gone. These are the Apollo 13 astronauts, and this is from the ground control, Apollo 13. And what happens in the Apollo 13 landing, the Apollo 13 mission, is that the astronauts were 2 days into their flight and one of the oxygen tanks exploded. So when that exploded, it meant they were almost out of fuel. They only had a very small amount left. The first impact meant that Apollo 13 was not going to land on the moon. They didn't have the fuel to land, and they certainly didn't have the fuel to take back off. So the moon landing was out. And of course, the big deal was they had to make it home. They also didn't have enough fuel to just turn around and come home. So they had to use this energy idea. They were falling towards the moon, so that meant something in terms of energy. I've got a clip from the movie. I think I'm going to play that because he explains it pretty well.
Okay, people, listen up. I want you all to forget the flight plan. From this moment on, we are improvising a new mission.
Oh, come on. Sorry, we'll get somebody to look at that.
How do we get our people home? They are here. We turn them around, straight back, direct abort.
No, sir. We get them on a free return trajectory. It's the option with the fewest question marks for safety.
I agree with Jerry. Use the moon's gravity, slingshot them around.
No, the LEM will not support 3 guys for that amount of time.
It barely holds 2.
I mean, we've got to do a direct abort. We do an about face, we bring the guys right home right now.
Get them back soon, absolutely.
We don't even know if the Odyssey's engine's even working, and if there's been serious damage to this spacecraft.
They blow up and they die.
That is not the argument. We're talking about time, not whether or not these guys will.
Come on, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you.
Okay, hold it. Let's hold it down. Let's hold it down, people. The only engine we've got with enough power for a direct abort is the SPS on the service module. What Lovell has told us, it could have been damaged in an explosion, so let's consider that engine dead. We light that thing up, could blow the whole works. It's just too risky. We're not going to take that chance. In fact, the only thing the command module is good for is re-entry, so that leaves us with the LEM, which means free return trajectory. And once we get the guys around the moon, we'll fire up the LEM engine, make a long burn, pick up some speed, and get them home as quick as we can.
Gene, I'm wondering what...
Okay, so that's actually what happened was they had to use their little bit of fuel just to get them on the right path, and then our simple energy analysis brought those astronauts straight home. So I asked the students, does anybody care about conservation of energy? And the answer is absolutely. If any of my students want to go on to work at the Canada Space Agency, anywhere like that, they have to understand all this stuff and be able to apply it. So yeah, whenever I can, I try and make kind of the physics that we do in class something real and important. You know, why should they study it? And hopefully that leads them being kind of really interested and wanting to learn. And maybe the very last thing I would say about trying to be engaged is that I try really hard to be available to my students and to communicate well with them. So they can get me by email lots of the time. I try and limit myself to when I answer it. You know, I try and be really quick 9 to 5. I don't always answer outside of business hours, and that's just kind of to take care of myself. But I do try and respond quickly and carefully with them. I tell students that if they're walking past my office and the door is open, then they are welcome to come in, and they often do, along with my office hours. And then I use Snapchat where they can send me pictures of problems that they're working on, and I can send it back just to help them study. So I do try really hard to be available to them because I think that availability just sort of supports trust and communication. And then hopefully that's kind of one extra step to being kind of connected with the class. So I think that's all of my thoughts I had together. Thank you very much for being here and kind of putting up with my slightly scattered thoughts once in a while. And then I think if Justina wants to look over questions and answers, or if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer. Or contribute your own experiences. I'd love to know what people do in other disciplines.
I think you've addressed all the comments and questions, sorry, that were there in the chat, Kelly. So if anybody would like to unmute themselves and speak, we can do that for the next 15 minutes or so.
Hi, Kelly. This is Kathleen Stevens. I'm, oh, there goes my dog barking. Sorry if you can hear her. I teach in nursing, and I'm actually teaching the satellite program right now. So we have 3 satellite sites, and the first offering was in September. And so I taught remotely, I guess it's all the, in 2020 and 2021 off and on. And but this was different because this was students in 3 separate classrooms, and I didn't have the chat function, which was I missed so much because you could use that so much in when you're teaching and they're, you know, have their own laptop or whatever. And so I found that I had difficulty getting knowing how they were doing because they were like 3 small screens on the class, you know, 2 classes had almost 30 students in it, and that's all I was seeing, and they had me on the screen. And so, you know, I figured out a few things by the end of the semester, but I realized how much I relied on either being in the classroom, their being able to pick up on, you know, their facial expressions, or if they were starting to get, you know, glazed over and they needed a break, and you could respond to that. So I didn't have those cues, and I didn't have the chat as well to kind of gauge. So I don't know, have you ever taught that way, like with students in the classroom away from you? Or if anybody has, that might have some tips for me.
Um, the only thing I did, I think that might be even remotely close, was I tried to teach hybrid for a little while where some students joined on WebEx and I had some in person. Ultimately, I gave up because I couldn't do it. The first thing that popped into my head for your specific case where you had the 3 classes in different places is I wonder, could you have them like open up a, I can't remember what it is, Discord or Discourse, like all the young people use it. And it's like a big group chat. Like that could have probably functioned as your chat window. So you could open up Discord on your cell phone or an iPad while they were all logged into it, and your chat window could just open there.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of Discord. One thing that I did do that's interesting that I did find that worked well was and I always, you know, share my cell phone number with them. I don't mind if they have it. So I just had them texting me. And but that they couldn't see anybody else's, you know,
Yeah.
so that, which also there's a lot of value in that. And so if I asked a question, because even on muting, by the time they unmuted and the delay, like it was just so disjointed that it really impacted the delivery of content. So, okay, I'll check out Discord. That's really interesting. I'm teaching again in September, that course, so I'm trying to, right out of the gate, have these things in place.
Oh, you know what?
So,
There's one on Brightspace too. It's not Discord, but it's like a group chat on Brightspace. I've never used it, but one of my colleagues did. So maybe the CITL folks could help you get that set up, and you could maybe
okay.
share that screen as well.
Because one of the things I thought about doing was also, because I was teaching via WebEx, just opening up, letting them open the link. But the Wi-Fi in the setting that they were in, now we're gonna be in our own sites in September, so I think that's going to be much better.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the challenges, was the Wi-Fi as well for at least one of the sites. So
Gotcha.
hopefully, right. But okay, I'll check out the Brightspace one
Yeah.
too. Appreciate it. Thank you. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.